Hi, this is Janine Skerry, Senior Curator of Metalwork at Colonial, Williamsburg. I wanted to talk to you a little bit today about letter writing, and I've removed some things from the desk in the dining room at the Governor's Palace to show you. It's so easy with the internet to reach out to ones we love, but in the 18th century, writing a letter was really complicated. For one thing, they didn't use envelopes. The piece of paper was folded in thirds, and then it was sealed with sealing wax. This is a reproduction stick of sealing wax that I have in my hand. Well, that's great, but how do you get the sealing wax on the envelope, and how does it actually hold it closed? Well, the sealing wax came in a round coil. The sealing wax came in a stick like this, but you also had a candle type of wax that came in a round coil. That's what you see here. This device is called a wax jack, and it basically holds a really long, soft birthday candle that you can spool out and light with a light from the fireplace here, and then it has a little nipper so it will help to extinguish itself, and you would drip the sealing wax by heating it over the candle and then dripping it on the piece of paper. When you got a large enough lump of sealing wax, you would take a desk seal. This one's really neat because it happens to be entirely made of a copper alloy with a steel head. So it's all metal, quite heavy, and it's cut with a pattern of initials, an entwined monogram for the person who owned this seal. And that would be pressed into the hot wax to make an impression that you would then have to crack or break in order to open or unseal the letter. The whole idea of writing a letter was much more complicated, obviously. You needed a lot of equipment, you needed a nice table or desk surface to work at, and if it was not bright daylight, you probably needed a candle as well. And that brings in this item right here. This is a two-part item. They've actually been married. I hope you hear wedding bells. I know I do whenever I think of it, because this piece was made in America and this piece was made in London. The bottom is the stand for a pair of snuffers, and it was made in London by a Huguenot silversmith named Simon Jouet. It was made in the 1750s. The snuffers that I'm holding in my hand were made in Richmond, Virginia, at the very end of the 18th century, so the 1780s or 90s, and it has a mark inside that stands for William and George Richardson, who were the silversmiths who made it. Well, why would we show these together? We show them together because they descended together through three different Williamsburg or Virginia families. So we know at some point they became an assembled set. We call these snuffers, and that's the 18th century term, but today most of us misunderstand how they're used. We think of them as snuffing or extinguishing the candle, but that's not what they were used for. To extinguish a candle, you used a doubter, and that's that little conical shaped cap that you would dip over the top of the flame to extinguish it. These are used for snuffing, and what does that mean? Well, candle wicks were not self-burning in the 18th century. They just kept on above, as the flame burnt down, the wick continued to stay upright until, of course, it fell over and would damage your tabletop or your writing surface. In order to prevent that from happening, you had to use a snuffer, which opens up like a little box, to trim or clip the wick without extinguishing the light. And that is a very tricky process. You had to learn how to properly snuff a candle. Most candles needed to be snuffed about every 15 minutes, so it was a lot of work to write a letter by candlelight or to do anything by candlelight. The last thing I'd mention is you'll notice that, like most snuffers, this pair ends in a very pointy tip. That's practical. It would be used to dig out the end of the candle, the stub from the candlestick, when you had burnt it down to the point where it couldn't be lit any further. I think the internet's a lot easier. Thanks so much for joining us today.